Hey guys, today I want to talk to you about a completely broken strategy for Grandmaster Strikes right now, and that is the Speaker's Mask on Solar Warlock. Basically, you combine this with the Ember of Benevolence, and you have constant Ember of Benevolence uptime, so you just have really fast ability regen, you're getting back healing turrets before the first healing turret is even gone with no other help, and then to stack all of this on top of itself, you have stuff like Song of Flame, which basically gives you invincibility while it's active. So this is basically a really powerful support build that also applies to yourself, and it enables extremely aggressive playstyles from your teammates and lets you go super fast for farming GMs. We're going to get into the details here in this video and go over a full build, because obviously just a fragment and an exotic is not a full build, so let's go ahead and get into it. So starting things off, let's go ahead and just look at the mechanics of the helmet. So this replaces your healing grenade with a healing turret. However, if you throw the healing turret on somebody, the initial impact still heals them like a healing grenade. And after that, it lasts for 15 seconds, and it just shoots out little balls of healing. Basically, it shoots out little tiny healing grenades that seek towards you and your allies, and do have splash that can hit you all at once if you're close to each other. Which then applies Resto X1, and it will apply Resto X2 to yourself if you are using the Touch of Flame on Solar, which I do recommend doing just to enable yourself to be a little more aggressive, because the rest of your build is support, so having more healing lets you just be more aggressive with your weapons. It's also worth noting that something about healing teammates with the turret, I'm not sure how exactly it works, but I believe just healing stuff with the turret spawns an orb and it's got a 10-second cooldown, and that pretty much covers how it works. So because this is all using solar verbs, it is able to proc Ember of Benevolence, which gives you a huge amount of ability regen for all three of your abilities every time you apply Resto or Radiant to your teammates. So the obvious synergy here is that you can get back your grenade faster than the turret even goes away, and you just have 100% uptime on this turret that keeps everybody on 100% uptime of Resto, and it makes things so much easier to be aggressive in. So then your teammates can run these super aggressive builds, anything like Orpheus Rig Hunter, or even Titans using Strand or Consecration. I've also found having a Cenotaph on your team so that the team can just spam rockets all the time works really well too. Basically, you just find a configuration of two teammates using aggressive builds and then mix it with this, and you can sort of get a super effective setup. And I did kind of group in Cenotaph with being an aggressive build, even though it really isn't, but it enables the whole team to be aggressive, so I still really like it. But now let's go ahead and look at the rest of the build. So starting off with the super, I recommend using Song of Flame. This is just completely broken. It applies 30% damage resist to your teammates, and also gives them a ridiculous amount of ability regen in the meantime. So if you have a teammate using something like stasis turrets, they can just throw down like 3 or 4 in the meantime. Or obviously everybody has just a ridiculous amount of abilities that they could just throw around all willy-nilly. And what's really broken about it is that yourself as the caster gets a 90% damage reduction to everything, which means that you can literally run in and face tank anything in the game. It's basically the same amount of damage resistance as blocking with a glaive, except without any of the movement loss, and you still get access to shooting all of your weapons. Even doing Grandmaster difficulty while fighting the final boss on the Glassway, which is one of the most punishing bosses damage-wise in the game, it will just insta-kill anybody using anything. You could just sit there and emote on him while he shoots at you if you have a healing turret active while you have Song of Flame on. It's completely broken, it's ridiculous, and you could just laugh at enemies and emote in their face while they do absolutely nothing to you. You can even see in the background the enemy is shooting me and my health bar just not moving because the amount of damage they're doing isn't even enough to trigger like a damage loss on my health bar. Now moving on from the super, the next choice is going to be for the melee and the grenade. The grenade is quite obvious, you're going to use healing grenade. As for the melee, it's kind of up to you if you want to use snap or the celestial fire. I prefer the celestial fire, at least for the current Grandmaster on the Glassway. However, if we do have closer range Grandmasters in the future with this build, then you could also use the incinerator snap as well, which does more damage. And almost finished, we're going to be looking at the aspects now, and there are a number of good choices on Solar Warlock. However, I decided to go with Hellion and Touch of Flame. While I absolutely hate not having access to Icarus Dash, and you could totally run without Hellion and use Icarus Dash if you wanted to, Hellion actually adds a lot of value to this build just by increasing the amount of damage you're doing passively. And you're always getting a ridiculous number of ignitions, especially because you're on the Solar subclass, which enables you to run Ember of Ashes. And on the topic of Ember of Ashes, we can go ahead and talk about the fragments now. And Ember of Ashes is going to be one of them, alongside Ember of Benevolence being another obvious one for all of the regen. And next up, I decided to use Ember of Singeing, basically so that you can spam your class ability while you are doing this. and that is to just proc Hellion more. And remember that this is going to multiply with the regen from Benevolence, and you're just going to have an insane amount of class abilities. And the class ability is also a decent backup if you somehow are missing your grenade and can't get any Benevolence procs. You could just do a Phoenix Dive next to your teammates, and you will do a Cure on them, which will give you a Benevolence proc, which will then give you back your abilities. And finally, we went with Ember of Torches just to get that radiant uptime all the time. The more damage is super good on all of your weapons, and it applies to all of your teammates around you as well, and because you're kind of hugging up to all get the restoration, this works out super great. And that is pretty much the build. However, we do want to talk about our weapon choice now while doing this. So because we have constant radiant and we also have things like the constant healing, we get to use a pretty aggressive set of weapons here. Certain strikes do kind of require you to use blinding GLs, and I decided to use that at least in my footage here, and the blinding GL was super helpful. However, you can literally get away with using stuff like shotguns in GMs because you are just that tanky. I will also recommend using Outbreak Perfected for some of the less coordinated teams. In my background footage, I do have a teammate using Cenotaph, so I'm using Gallowhorn and using the Battle Scar for Shoot to Loot and Barrier. While I do have access to Constant Radiant, Pulse Rifles are one of the better primaries in the game at this point, and I did want to have one on just so that I would have constant ammo on my GL and to have access to Shoot to Loot. That being said, it is important to remember that primaries are not very good DPS, and that all of my damage basically came from Galley, and I had enough ammo to maintain that, so that is why I chose to use it. That being said, if you're not using a Cenotaph theme, like I said, Outbreak Perfected is very good as a weapon at just killing the ads in GMs, at least in harder content, and it also stacks up its damage and does pretty well at just taking down champions. Having 3 teammates just lasering things down with the Outbreak Perfected is a perfectly viable strat here, especially when you have stuff like Song of Flame going on, keeping you completely invincible while you have the healing going on. Lastly, I want to talk about some specific builds that you can use to complement teammates who are using this, because if you have a teammate using this, then obviously you don't need to be using it yourself. This has so much uptime that you do not need or want more than one person using this just because it would be a waste. So if your teammate is using this and you're on Warlock, I recommend running just Prismatic Warlock and using either Song of Flame to have a second Song of Flame, or a damage super like Nova Bomb or Needle Storm, whatever happens to match the surges for that week. After that, I recommend having probably the Stasis Turret Spam, just because it has very good overload and unstop abilities, and it also has some pretty nice crowd control, and because we're not using stuff like rockets to just instantaneously blow up everything anymore, crowd control does have a little bit more of a use case. Before this season, we had access to Triple Cino, which would basically allow us to generate 6 rockets off of any champion, which meant that you could literally just use rockets for ad clear. However, rockets are a little bit more expensive now, since Cenotaph doesn't stack anymore. That being said, it is very easy to get by without ever using any stasis turrets, so that is more something I would use if your teammates aren't able to keep up and they need the help of that. That being said, on Titan, you could also just run Strand Titan with Synthoceps, or just use the new Prismatic setup and use something like Triple Consecration. Consecration isn't the most powerful thing in the game, but it definitely does pretty good damage against champs, even in Grandmaster content, and since you're being kept alive by a healing Warlock, then you can get away with using that as well. GMs are probably the best time to be using a Titan in the game. They pretty much have absolutely no place in raids at this moment. However, they at least have some use in roam content where ad clear is a little bit more important than your DPS. Another great build would be to have is an Orpheus Hunter on your team. Obviously, being able to spam tethers stops all the enemies from shooting you while they're suppressed, and it also makes them super easy to kill because it basically links their healths together. You kill one and they all explode. If I were to make a perfect team composition for me, it would probably be to have an Orpheus Hunter, a Healing Spam Warlock, and a Cenotaph Warlock. That way you could just tether all the enemies together, then have the Cenotaph Warlock mark one of the champions, and then just blow everything up with rockets while being constantly healed, being effectively invincible. Anyway, that's going to do it for the video now. Thank you guys so much for watching, it is much appreciated. And really quickly before you go, I did just want to let you guys know I have a Discord server I've been trying to get a ton of people in. I absolutely love getting to interact with you guys. We have a lot of helpful channels, including a channel with links to some useful stuff like the Aegis spreadsheet for DPS, the Destiny Data Compendium, and some other tools. And we also have a channel where people can include build links so that people can just find good builds to use. So if that's something that interests you, make sure you go check my description. I've got a link to the Discord below, and I would love to see you there. And that's really going to do it for the video, so thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.